Hello and welcome to the Ancestors of the Four Directions workshop. This is called Displaced Women of the European Diaspora. The Ancestors of the Four Directions is a group of Indigenous elders and representatives that speak on wisdom, healing, colonialism, racism, speaking the truth, and unity. The speakers here represent the northern branch of the Ancestors, the Four Directions, and we are called the Order of the White Shell, and the Order of the White Shell is based on one of our Indigenous mentors' teachings. I am called Mari Fix McEwen, or Saineta Bofrush Koyaden Trus, from the Utree Clan Ewing. And I am here on Imaliwu soil and Tongva and Chumash territory, and am in Southern California. We now begin with ceremony. Creator, grandmothers, grandfathers, this is your granddaughter, Saineta Bofrush Koyaden Trus speaking, welcoming all here from the Four Directions into this sacred circle. We cleanse and purify ourselves in a way with clearing power and the gentleness of the sage. As the earth and fire join each other and transmute themselves, we invite these healing medicines to completely wash over our bodies, minds, spirits, and feelings, bathing every thought, every gesture, every prayer, every word and deed brought into this sacred circle and space and beyond as we explore the deep topics at hand. Visualize this feather brushing anything away, clearing off anything heavy or outmoded that you have carried with you, anything that no longer you wish to hold on to. Release it all, bless it all in a kind and gentle way. May you all feel lighter, brighter, and clear to communicate in this purified sacred circle of intention and creation, all my relations, and I pass to the center.
And calling in the east, Udher, August air, the element of air. Calling in the south, Jeshgard, August Dochan, the element of fire. Calling in the west, Yeter, August Ishke, in the element of water. Calling in the north, Twishkart, August June, the element of earth. Calling in the above and below, Huas, August Hish. Calling in the out, within, and through, Amach, Isti, August Frij. And I pass to the center.
Under the divine law of our primordial nature, the truth, love, justice, and harmony, the understanding of the law of interdependence, I hereby open the Ancestors of the Four Directions and the Order of the White Shell. This opening of the order is a continuation of what is essential in ourselves. Here we seek to find, make aware, and embody the truth of our nature, the clearing of all delusions, and the caretakership of the very life we are in service to. In this congruence, we attain peace in ourselves and in the quadrants. And now we pray. Tu doing a spirit do husent, agasi gosent nyart, agasi nyart tishkent, agasi tishkent ulus, agasin ulus in kirt, agasin ulus in kirt an grafwi, agasin grafwi agrado na ba a fuad. Agus in grada na ba fuad an grado in Holy Spirit, agus gach mahas avanan lesh. Grant, O Spirit, your protection, and in protection strength, and in strength understanding, and in understanding knowledge, and knowledge the knowledge of justice, and in the knowledge of justice the love of it, and in the love of it the love of all existence, and in the love of all existence, the love of Great Spirit and all goodness. Welcome, everyone. This is the Displaced Europeans in Diaspora, and the original write-up for this workshop states, are you a displaced European or part European living in the United States, Turtle Island, or another country outside of your quote-unquote homeland? Are you attracted to Indigenous, Native, or European folkways, or both? And do you feel like you don't fit in spiritually, or do you have multiple cultures you are part of? Even if you currently live in Europe or among your community, are you like many others of us in this community that are displaced or trying to reestablish your roots or find your spot or just figure it out? Speaking from what I assume is a tendency in the room, we European people or part European people seem to have not found our real place. If we're part of something else, like Native American or African American, African, we seem to want to attach ourselves to that part of us and leave the European part basically unattended to or languishing on the side, as the European part is often not a pretty picture or there's some shame involved in it. Also, when we have a little bit Native, we struggle to fit into the Native paradigm and the community often, or we struggle to be even seen as Native. If you're part African or European, you dance between these worlds. They used to say in the United States, if you even had one drop of African American blood, then you were labeled as a Black person only. So as far as society, we either don't like the church system that we came up in during the conquest of Europe or Turtle Island or Africa, and are doing a dance between religiousness and cultural reclamation, or we're studying other cultures like Buddhism, Taoism, African or Native American ways. And sometimes we end up using words that don't fit our culture, and we kind of take them, like Mongolian words like shamanism. If we live in Europe or in the United States, we usually don't seem to have a line directly to an unbroken lineage of our foremothers or forefathers. And we may know vaguely somewhere about our ancestors, or they ended up moving all over the place, or we seem to be amalgam of many groups of people. So what do? If we're part Native, we often did not grow up in a clan, so we have challenges rejoining into that culture. A lot of Native people say that if you're not part of the culture, then you're not really Native, even if you're 50% Native, as an example. So there are so many belief systems, there's so much pain and hurt on the planet, and there's a lot of confusion, and there's kind of a lot of lashing out and pointing fingers. We find ourselves saddled with the superficial culture of the Western mind. And I'm going to share this article by Lorenzo Fox to illustrate a point. And it's kind of hardcore, so buckle down. He starts saying, going on Burning Man, Buddhist retreats, trekking in Nepal, rainbow gathering. He starts saying, I traveled to Standing Rock in November 2016 with my friend, hauling over $5,000 worth of winter tents, clothing, food, and gear. And for those who don't know where Standing Rock is, it's in the United States, and it's a Native American stronghold where they had water protectors. He says, my full-time job allowed me to stay barely a week, and my ego, mixed with a healthy dose of white savior mentality, convinced me that my training as an EMT and my lifetime of experience with direct action and social justice would make me useful to the people there. Fast forward 5 days, and I was crying in the driver's seat of my car while my amazing friend listened quietly as I grieved for something I didn't know I'd ever lost. Standing Rock is an incredible place, an indigenous-led prayer ceremony populated by resistance movements from every corner of the globe, many of them bound to each other by shared and distinct traditions of dance, song, storytelling, and a way of being in the physical world. Like any indigenous and overwhelmingly powerful place, white people had decided to take it. White people like me were arriving to Standing Rock in droves. Some of us even dressed like it was Burning Man, forcing our way to seats right next to the sacred fire, putting our pasty faces too close to elders and demanding that they teach us their culture, clumsily mimicking centuries old dance traditions, jostling for position in the lines for free food, taking up so much space that the medicine tent had to be guarded 24/7, and young Dakota men were placing themselves in front of the elders to protect them from the onslaught of questions and consumption and demands for emotional labor and relieving centuries of trauma. By the end, we arrived. Standing Rock elders had begun holding meetings twice a day, and they were called orientations, where each of these things was addressed. And indigenous people were demanding that white people stop colonizing their space. Yes, colonizing their space. And he goes on to say, white people have no culture. This is partially true and partially untrue, he says. This statement is a form of denial and also a source of grief. And I want to extend what he's going to next say to all of us, really. White people do have culture. And, because some of these, some of us, haven't really retained the old ways, even if we're 100% indigenous or African. We've all kind of westernized our mind and our habits. So he says, our culture is that of colonization, of genocide, of taking, of envy, and of fear. The majority of white people can name no more than 2 generations back in their family. The majority of white people barely know where their grandparents came from, much less who their ancestors were. The majority of white people have no traditions, and the ones we have are rooted in consumption and superficial application of organized religion, both of which are steeped in histories of violence. Christmas is about a severed tree dropping dead needles on heaps of plastic crap, grinding the gears of our capitalist economy. Not even or barely even a formally pagan ritual that has been bastardized and twisted into a stressful display of wealth and excess. Easter is about disposable plastic balls full of processed sugar. Valentine's Day was created exclusively by the greeting card industry to make you spend money on disappointing gifts and unhealthy treats for your unsatisfied monogamous partner. Independence Day is too long a period of time where daily explosions of worshiping the war triggered people and animals with PTSD and create an alarming amount of pollution, maimed limbs, and death. Thanksgiving, don't get me started. The closest thing white people have to culture is our disturbingly fanatical obsession with sports, which we use to justify things like property destruction, vitriolic hatred for people we don't know, and accidental death. I guess Cynthia was telling me how many people die in sports, sports fights between different teams and all this. These are the same qualities we use to justify our constant military assault on developing and impoverished communities at home and abroad. Which brings me to my main point. The culture of white people is a culture of death, he says. It's a culture of endless war, desensitization to human suffering, and the upholding of a brutal individualism fueled by greed. It's a deep, dark hole of grief and of loss. We don't even know what we lost. We don't know our ancestors. We don't have stories of creation and hope and family, only stories of destruction and genocide. Our coming of age ceremony is a school shooting. Our song is a ballad about rockets and explosions. Our elders die alone, surrounded by their stories of family members who no longer visit them in rest homes. Our cities were built by the blood of slaves on top of the graves of Native people. Philosopher John Cozy writes, "Violence pervades this culture. Americans not only engage in violence, they are entertained by it. Killing takes place in America more often than the sun rises. Currently at an average of 87 times a day, going to war in Afghanistan is less dangerous than living in Chicago. The Romans went to the Colosseum to watch people being killed. In major cities, Americans look at out their windows. Baseball, once America's national game, a benign sport, has been replaced by football so violent it destroys the brains of those who play it. Violent films dominate our motion picture theaters and television sets. Our children play killing video games. How do we get to enlightenment? We seem to have lost that privilege centuries ago. We buried it in graves on land upon which we were strangers. And this loss is palpable. You can feel it, and it's painful. There's a profound level of fear inherent in white people and the way we desperately grasp that which is not ours. This hole cannot be filled by our self-delusion, and it represents generations of isolation and grief. It is our own generational trauma that we carry with us and pass on to our children. It hurts, and we do not know how to change that pain. So we take the traditions, costumes, dances, songs, and agency of marginalized groups after we have decimated their populations, after we've destroyed their homes, and we polish those items so the suffering cannot be seen. We take their words out of their context, and we use them to make money and fake solidarity. We take their circles and stories, and we wash them with our whiteness, and we struggle to fit them into our bloody box. We take their lands, their trails, their mountains, their rocks, and climb and walk on them, snatching frenzied glimpses of what we want to call connection, enlightenment, transcendence, and wondering why they slip through our grasp. So instead, we get high on endorphins or ayahuasca and call that good enough. We want to learn something about ourselves that we lost, and so we keep taking the tokens and lives of other communities. But that one doesn't fit, so on to the next. The cycle needs to stop. It is the responsibility of white people to face our history and to fight the culture we have created. Stop hiding behind the stories and tokens of other people and be accountable for the brutal ways we have consolidated our power and privilege. Stop pretending like you can hike or climb or meditate your way out of this power dynamic. You're not enlightened. Well, I can't say that about everybody here. I'm not sure, but let's stop with the excuses. You are powerful, and it is time to own that and to use it to change the culture of death and violence that has left us spiritually and morally bankrupt. Call out the bullshit when you see it in yourself and in others. Lovingly, of course. Stop colonizing the lives and land and stories of others. Stop perpetuating the culture of death and instead fight for the living. That's the end of the article, and I'm going to speak to that now. So, yes, we don't have much, and it is painful. What did our parents or grandparents pass down to us that is noteworthy? Maybe a few recipes in a book, or a few cultural ideas, but were we taught the ways of a culture? Were we initiated on how to live or initiated in what to value that was outside the current monetary paradigm? Something meaningful and deep and soul stirring? Were we trained since we were small on how to support all of humanity in the ecosystem? Or were we taught just to fight for ourselves and our individualism? Make compromises we really shouldn't be making, and hopefully not go down the tubes of the establishment that are so painfully now becoming apparent as food rises, rents rise. It's like we're on our own and on the brink of going down a sinkhole. Do we have truly something that is worth holding on to here? And what are we willing to do to change it? Examining the word diaspora, it means the dispersion or the spread of a people from their original homeland. And I would suggest that it really means to venture away from your home or your heart. It's not really that we've left that's the issue, but that we've left our true place, the true place within us, our true nature, our true heart. I'm going to pass to Cynthia now, and Cynthia is going to share some experiences she's had. And I pass to you now.
Thank you, Grandmother Mari. Yeah, wonderful article. Very, very tough to hear, I'm sure, for a lot of people. This actually brought to mind when I was living in Massachusetts, one of the early health food stores that came out in the 90s was called Bread and Circus. And it's very an odd choice of a name because that was what the Romans would call their entertainment in the Colosseum, with the gladiators killing each other and being eaten by tigers. Not very healthy minded. But let me start by introducing myself. My name is Cynthia Klatte Cunningham. I live on the unceded territory of the Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui people, which is today called Tucson. My watershed is Sabino Creek, and I'm a staff member, ceremonialist, and a counselor with Ancestors of the Four Directions, a member of Order of the White Shell, and I'm also a member of Clan Cunningham and Obod. And when I was talking about this topic with Mari, I once said, I feel like we live on the island of misfit toys. And I don't know how many people remember in the 1966 Americans children's animated film Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. But for those who never saw it, in the story, Rudolph doesn't fit in with his other reindeer peers because of his glowing red nose. He was just too different and was rejected. And in the story, Hermie is an elf who also doesn't fit in because he wants to be a dentist and is told, no, elves make toys, you can't do that. So Rudolph and Hermie were outcasts, and they became traveling companions. And during their travels, they came across an island that was populated with toys that weren't good enough to be given to children as Christmas gifts. And the island was called the Island of Misfit Toys, and the toys weren't accepted because they were either missing a piece or didn't quite function as planned or weren't like other toys. So they ended up there waiting for someone who would accept them as they are. And like some of these toys, like the spotted elephant or the doll without a nose or the water pistol that fired jelly, I felt I didn't have a place or I didn't quite fit in. I never fit in with the American majority culture of materialism and exploitation of resources. That was one level. Another level was I also came from a family of Polish heritage, and as a young child got bullied for that. Yet if I had, let's say instead my parents never came to America, I don't think I would have fit in the Polish culture because I didn't speak any Polish. My family had been in the US for 2 generations. My grandmother spoke Polish, but my mother never learned it and had rejected much of the Polish culture because having been born in the US, she really felt a strong drive to fit in and be popular. So Polish was never spoken in my family. And the only heritage I inherited was the food, pierogi, kielbasa, gołąbki, and the polka. And even though my parents were not religious or spiritual, my mother held on to some practices of the Catholic Church. And because I didn't have a frame of reference to put that in, because we didn't go to church, as a small child, I associated the cross with horror movies because that was the only place I saw them when someone was fighting off a vampire or a demon. So whenever I saw one, I became very afraid. And as I learned a little bit about the Catholic Church, and we would go once a year on Christmas, I also was kind of turned off that one could confess to a priest and then go out, commit the same transgression again, come back, confess again, and everything would be okay. I didn't quite understand that. That didn't seem quite right to me. I remember being 5 years old and finding a much deeper connection with the earth than in any church we visit on a holiday. And I remember spontaneously praying to the spirit of rain to please hold off rain for another day so I could have my play date with my friends and play outside, because that was where I felt best. And I remember leaving food out as an offering to the spirit of the rain. I don't know where this came from. I didn't see it in a cartoon or read it in a book. I was still learning to read. And it certainly didn't come from my parents. And fast forward a year or two, I remember my parents taking me to an Indian reservation in upstate New York. And my father and brother went off to do, the boys kinds of things. And my mom took me, and she brought her camera and wanted to photograph the native people. So she left me in the hands of a native woman who was dressed traditionally, and she was demonstrating what it would be like to live in a native village. So the woman had a few small children, and she seated me with them and fed us. And my mother went and did her thing. And I remember it seemed like an exceedingly long length of time that went by. But the woman didn't fret about that, so I didn't either. And time went on, and I remember thinking, if Mom doesn't come back for me, I'll be all right. This woman will take care of me. She treats me like I'm one of her own, so I'll be okay. I had no fear, and I had this sense of there being a place for everyone. And ever since that time, I felt a deep respect for Native American culture. Then I got older, left for college, and had more freedom, and started studying alternative spiritual traditions, things other than monotheism. I was seeking an earth-honoring spiritual practice for myself where men and women were treated as equals. And I started out studying some neo-pagan practices. And I practiced that for a time, and that worked well for a period. But there were some elements that weren't quite a fit for me. The group of practitioners I got to know seemed more focused on physical appearance and looking and behaving witchy, were more focused on that than their spiritual beliefs. And it just started feeling more superficial. And I didn't feel like I fit in there. It was also, I couldn't find any lineage where wisdom was passed down from the past, generation to generation, an unbroken line like Native Americans had. And most of it seemed created very recently. I went on studying and then discovered animism, which at the time in the 90s was called shamanism, and began studying, quote unquote, what we call the shamanic arts, and did a 1-year apprenticeship with a woman who reported being of Native Siberian and Native American descent. Then I moved to Tucson and got involved with an eclectic group of animists. This was a better fit, but then I became aware of the issue of cultural appropriation and started really questioning, what was I learning and where was it coming from, and was this legitimate for me to be studying? Had this information been freely given and meant to be shared? And I spent a period looking at European spiritual practices again, returning to trying to discover my own ancestors' culture. As my maternal ancestors came from Eastern Europe, I started studying Slavic spiritual practices, looking at groups like Slavic native faith, but then read that they tended to draw those very interested in white nationalism and were described as being very conservative and criticized as being misogynist. And that definitely was not a fit for me. So I continued searching. Then came upon a spiritual community in Tucson who studied with indigenous elders in Peru, who welcomed individuals outside of their heritage. And it was their expressed intent to spread their teachings in America. And that felt more legitimate. I continued to be aware that there were many people who didn't quite agree with this practice. And in my work as a counselor, I sought to be identified as an ally to students of marginalized groups, including Native American students. And a few years ago, I completed a certification in facilitating talking circles, which was taught by a man who identified himself as a hereditary indigenous chief in the Americas, who openly sought to teach white Americans about Native talking circles, believing we all need to work together to solve the world's problems. And through his organization, I got introduced to the indigenous grandmothers of Europe, which is where I met Grandmother Mari. At the time, I thought taking the Talking Circle certification might be viewed by Native American students as, that make me feel safer to see as a counselor. I identify me as a potential ally. But when my agency finally hired our first Native American counselor, I reached out to welcome them. And I had mentioned having recently taken the certification. And I came to find out this person took offense to that. And this led to a planned intervention between a supervisor, myself, and the new staff person. And the native staff member shared that my friendliness felt aggressive and made them fearful and distrustful of me. Apparently, my certification didn't inspire comfort, but was viewed as cultural appropriation. Well, this was a real learning experience for me. I also learned many didn't support the hereditary chief sharing with non-native people the talking circle ways and labeled him as new age. So this was becoming very complex. So now I still find myself continuing to be drawn to the past to learn ways of living most harmoniously with Mother Earth and all her creation, and striving to do so in a respectful and sensitive way. So I think there's much that we can learn from them. And I look forward to exploring many possibilities and new learnings as being part of this group. And I welcome you all. Thank you. And I pass back to the center.
We had another person that was going to be speaking, but they cannot make it today. And I'm not going to go into their background, but generally they study with Indigenous people and have had some different issues with being able to be accepted, not with those people, but with the community at large if they were to go out and share what they've learned. So some of what Cynthia's saying, it's pretty prevalent. And sometimes when you study with somebody, you kind of get this sense that everything's all right in the world outside, but there are quite a few people that are still hurting and in pain. And so it becomes a tricky dance. I studied myself for years in a very concentrated way with Indigenous people. 5 days a week, we were doing ceremony and dances and the likes. And I found myself often on the brunt of any of the problems because I was kind of the one pointed to that had caused the problem within society, So it was when you come in and you want to you come in the eyes of healing and love and want to start cleaning that up. It can be a tricky process, and maybe someday I'll go into that a little more. But now we would like to open up a brief sharing circle for anybody that's here. We'd love to have all of you participate if you can, if you are inclined. And please refrain from self-promotion while you're sharing. And we'd like to ask you to keep your sharing to 3 minutes max.
Yeah, and I'll just go over some guidelines for our sharing circle. You can just raise your hand if you'd like to share and introduce yourself, first name only, and leaving out any affiliations and being respectful and not engaging in a lot of self-promotion. Share from your heart about your experience versus commenting on other people in the circles. Share. Talk about, maybe you can talk about what you resonated with, what was spoken previous. Um, be open to hearing different perspectives, being respectful one another.
We're speaking on any experience that you might have in feeling like you don't fit in, and maybe some of the life experience that you've had along those lines. Anyway.
And and if you hear a chime, that is just a kind of a gentle reminder to start to wrap up. You don't have to immediately end, just kind of indication that time to bring it to a close so that everyone can have time to speak. And would anyone like to share about what this brings up for you and what's on your heart and mind? Carrie Ann.
Hi. I was attracted to this. I don't even know where I found the link to this group, honestly, one of the pages I'm part of. And I guess I've been attracted to native practices. I've done a lot of work with ayahuasca. It's been a way that I've been trying to heal myself. Um, my sense in myself is that I do fit the qualifications of what you were speaking of, Cynthia, of we don't remember past 2 generations. Where did we come from? What am I doing here? I have Polish lineage, Lithuanian, some Scottish, but there's just such a disconnect. And like, what are my Lithuanian ancestors doing in Danville, Illinois, in coal mines, for instance? What are they doing there? I just have a sense, more than it being white or non-white. I feel like white European people were the first to be attacked and assimilated by whatever this monster is that has taken over our planet. And so we were like the first to be traumatized, the first to forget, the first to be shattered and, brought into, like, we're trying to survive, so we become part of it. I think that gets lost a lot, I guess. Yeah, and so I'm wanting to, so I've been attracted, I found my way to African tradition of all things. I felt a really strong resonance with, like, from the Yoruban traditions, the Orishas, and I've worked with them quite a lot via the ayahuasca route. That's the purest that I've found as far as what feels resonant within me. But I'm not an African person, I'm very non-African, but I don't feel myself appropriating in any work that I've done in that way, because I felt like the Orishas were choosing me. They're beyond color. They're beyond, these energies are beyond race and identification in my experience. So I've never tried to make money off of that, but I've just received that healing for myself. And I feel an affinity with that. But I feel a draw to know, who I am and who are my gods, energies, selfhood. I feel a longing for that, to know that. And I really haven't found it. I just haven't. So So I just sort of limp along and resonate with what I resonate with. But I feel like whatever we're doing is like humanity against something, a monster, more than I don't identify with these groups. And I even feel a apprehension. Oh, I do. I feel quite an apprehension about anti-white sentiments that I'm seeing a lot of. That feels very uncomfortable, and it feels like the powers are using that for their gains. So to even this idea of being anti-racist and things like that, really, I feel something seize up and within myself that it's not a route I feel comfortable with. But yeah, I just come with a sincere heart to know what my traditions are. And I was led to watch some videos of Lithuanian people and their practices around Christmas time, whatever they did at Christmas, whatever's left of what they have left over there. It was just so beautiful the way they would just be singing to the grains when the grains are being produced, and singing, just all this singing and beauty. And that's what I love to do with, like, via the Orisha traditions, is to do these songs and to connect with these primal energies. And it just, like, that's the closest I've gotten for myself. So that's just kind of where I'm at, sort of unformed, but very curious about finding out what my roots are based on my deep lineage that has been broken at some point. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something, and really, Katie, since you haven't been to our group before, we are definitely in resonance with what you're talking about. I have been mentioning things the way I have just because I found that article and I wanted to start with it. But honestly, and what we're doing in the Ancestors of the Four Directions is to heal this hoop that has been broken, and to understand our place into it and start coming into that space. And the Ancestors of the Four Directions is a group, like I said, of all Indigenous elders. And this just happens to be the Northern branch. And we're discussing this topic at this time, the good, bad, and the ugly. And because you're also dealing with other people that are projecting things upon us. And so if we look at every single way it can be seen and understand that for ourselves internally, that a lot of people are projecting certain energies on us, but also there's a lot of guilt within different factions of the quote unquote European groups, or quote unquote white, even though white was a title that came in with the Irish. This is a long conversation, so we're just kind of cutting to the chase and making it starting a certain way. So we're not saying that white people are the cause, and at the same time, perhaps in our going along with the monster to just survive, a lot of things have been lost, and it's just a deep topic to talk about. So I really want to honor where you're coming from with that, and tell you that you have a place in our heart with what you're saying. So, all right. Would someone like to go next?
Yes, Debbie, thank you. Welcome.
And Debbie, Kanada Kosa Kwe Nishnakas, Makwan Dundam Gekeko Getchidai Kwe. Yeah, it's a deep, deep topic there. And the humans are spiritually ill. You know, we've touched upon a little bit of all of what I think everybody in the room probably may understand. But keeping in mind that it's all one creator. You know, And there's many lessons that we're going through in that mending of the sacred hoop, right? It's what the human beings are having to go through to get to the point that we need to transform into. And that, remembering that, there's a lot of hurt people, and we're all hurt people, especially when we start looking at uncovering what happened in Europe, and then how colonization, right? And then everybody that was hurt. And so everybody's at a different stage of the healing process. But prophecy said that all colors of the human being will be uniting, and the indigenous people will be leading the way to awaken what was lost. And I think, the practice of humility is very key, and it's a very awkward thing that, am I appropriating something or not? But if you were called into something and given something, and you're not making money off of it, and you're using it for good, right? You're not using it for your ego. And when you find moments that these things are appropriate, that person that you're talking to that may need some guidance, right? So I've always was taught to lead from behind. My ancestry is very mixed. I recently, found my ancestor from South Carolina, what's now South Carolina. Her colonized name was Bridget Jeffcoat. And she was alive from the late 1700s to 1800s, and lived to be 84 years old. Had married a person from Great Britain, or whatever we were calling it back then. And, it's the remnants of the Trail of Tears and the scattering there of people that fled, so, and then also the ancestry of slave owners, and that recognition of the enslaved women that kept my ancestors alive with their milk when they were babies, So digging way back there, and it can be really hard. So then I find myself, because I grew up all over the planet, and I'm like, I came to the United States, I wasn't looking at race, I was looking at culture, what culture people come from, right? Then the color thing really hit me in the face here. The heart, the culture, we're all walking around with a blend of cultures. And then we get faced with, well, what's your culture? But if you're a blend of many things, right? So what is it? Which one are you going to pick? So it gets back to how to learn how to be a human being, and taking on the, what do they call that? Like the virtues of practice on how to be a good human being. So in the next life, in the next realm, we're prepared. It's a spiritual battle. I don't like using the word battle, but it's a spiritual test that we're all in right now. The Cunningham, I pass the feather into the center.
Thank you so much, Debbie, for sharing. And Shauna has her hand up.
Thank you. That's a very big topic. I'm going to venture to say that I think American white people, Caucasians, may have a harder time with this than Caucasian people who actually live in a country of, maybe they live in Austria, maybe they live in Holland or Germany or England. My earliest sense of kind of having a loss of culture related to being Caucasian was just growing up, and if I'd go to a festival or anything and just realizing that my culture didn't have dances. That's when I first noticed it. Even if you go to a festival where there's lots of ethnicities and cultures, you'll see people doing Austrian dances or German dances or definitely Irish dances. But as a Caucasian in America, I just felt like, oh, I don't have any culture. I don't have that. And just felt like we're boring. Maybe that's why I needed to seek out other cultures. I am 1/4 Armenian, and then the rest of me is kind of that Caucasian mix. And English, Danish, I don't know. And even my Armenian ancestors, when they came over here, had had such a struggle before that they wanted to leave that behind and become very much assimilated into American culture. To where our name Hagopian was changed to Jacob, just to fit in. And my grandfather hardly would talk about his life. It had just been too hard. And I find that my mother's side, she feels like her genealogy is boring, so she doesn't even share much about it. So I definitely have that sense of, just kind of being a Caucasian thing, just kind of being a race. And, we're just American. And then I do feel that guilt about how the indigenous people of Turtle Island have been treated and throughout the whole world. I, along with some of my friends in this group, I do love indigenous teachings and indigenous cultures. And I struggle maybe more so now than ever with not feeling like I belong anywhere. Like I don't know that I feel welcome as much as I used to feel welcome, I do think there's just this sickness of division that's happening. And I feel there's a loss in even being able to express who I am, because there's like who I am biologically, but then there's my spirit that feels like there's many parts to my spirit, many cultures to my spirit that I resonate with or am drawn to that don't really have anything to do with my biological DNA. It's like my spiritual DNA. So I don't know if it's like just the time it is on the planet, and hopefully we'll begin to heal that sacred too. But for instance, many of my dreams come in Native American form and Native American symbols. And what do I do with that? I just feel really alone. Like, I don't know. This feels like a really lonely time, and I'm struggling. So, I'm glad for circles like this, and I feel like I have to be strong and nurture what I feel my soul is, because I feel like my soul is the bigger part of why I'm here than even my DNA. So I will continue to connect to what I feel like is the true essence of my soul and how to express that in my skills. And like I said, there's many cultures within my soul. And groups of people. So I think I'll just keep hanging out with all those groups of people anyway. And thank you for this. I loved the article you read, Mari. I don't know if you want to share. I don't know where that was from again or whatever, but thank you so much. And
Thank you so much, Shauna, for sharing from your heart. Would anyone else like to share of anything that resonated with them from today's topics?
No one knows this now, but we will have coming meetings or coming events in the future where we can get deeper into this and start maybe bringing ourselves into more clarity on the topic. So anyone that hasn't shared yet is welcome to do so later. I kind of want to make this part brief because we don't have a lot of time left before 1, but we thought we would briefly touch upon some subjects of philosophical and spiritual practices that many of our people have ended up exploring when they encounter this feeling of not having any tradition, and how indigenous or traditional are some of these practices. We want to look at that idea. What is historical context, and what these practices came out of historically, and maybe we can both abbreviate that somehow in our presentation. But I wanted to talk briefly about Druidism real quickly. And according to a scholar that I know, Dr. Morris, there was a man in the 1750s called Yolo Margos, and he was a poor stonemason, but a brilliant poet, and he created a series of forgeries based on his newly created neo-Druidic philosophy. And he claimed the forgeries were coming from an ancient Druidic tradition, and that he was the sole possessor of this secret Druidic knowledge. And he was the one that gave birth to neo-Druidry, actually. And the modern Druidry has its roots there. Most of it's made up. He doesn't entirely just create a totally new mythology, but he does create a new spiritual philosophy that's very Christian in many ways. It has the Christian God at the top of the pyramid, and Awen, which was actually a Welsh concept, is used as an expression of the name of God. Anoven being the type of hell, progressing up the worlds on the tree to Gwenvid, which is a type of heaven, paradise, and much a product of its time. But within that, Yolo is drawing on the Welsh Bardic traditions and incorporating these very traditional spiritual concepts such as Awen. He's aware of Taliesin, which is a great poet of the Welsh Bardic tradition, and Merlin of the Welsh tradition, and drawing on those old materials and as a practicing Welsh bard himself. This Druidic tradition was a Christian tradition that he created with a bit of pagan undertones. And Dr. Morris says that Wales is ripe at this time for this intellectual fervor that he created. Yolo takes this energy and transforms it into essentially a new Christian priesthood that he calls the Welsh goddess. He holds a large ceremony and basically initiates all these people into goddesses of the Welsh bards. And this organization is made up of new druids that take up the ceremonial role in Welsh culture to facilitate the priestly duties that basically becomes a whole ceremonial structure dreamed up by him. And he may have borrowed from other cultures, traditions, and Masonic tradition. And he actually put the 4 directions into his lineage. And also there are hermetic flavorings. And basically he's creating a tradition that he wanted to have for himself, even though it was a fabrication and a forgery. There were tales about druids of the past, but they didn't have any information about it. And druids weren't known to be in the stone circles. That was way after that fact. So Dr. Morris also states that when Neo-Druidry was created, that Welsh people were at the time very downtrodden and second-class working citizens, and that Iolo Margaux turns up with a new mythology for them to believe in, and that he gives them a new ceremonial structure in which to celebrate and honor themselves and to make sacred those things that were sacred to the Welsh nation. And I know that this happened also in Lithuania in some ways, in different places where they might have some of the prayers, but they don't remember the melodies of the songs, all sorts of things. So they've kind of filled in the gaps. So they'll be just like a little shred of something from the past. And then there's kind of a reimagining of something that happens. These ceremonies are used in the highest echelon of Welsh culture today. These forged documents. And he says that if Iolo wouldn't have created the forgeries, that sanctification would not have been part of the Welsh culture. And Iolo twisted the facts, and accuracy should be safeguarded. But Morris goes on to say that so is the imaginal spirit and the mythical life of a nation important, even though Iolo left his sticky fingers all over the Welsh tradition, as Sir Maurice Jones puts it. And so I'm going to pass to Cynthia for a brief, try to, cut it down thing of your research.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just going to touch on European neo-pagan witchcraft and Wicca. And it largely began with Gerald Gardner in England, who was an author who reported he was initiated into a coven in 1939, but this was never confirmed. And his writings came out in the 50s and then became very popular in the 60s. And that's when in America, the witchcraft revival called Wicca really came into being. The term Wiccan, I discovered, came from a first writing about using the term around 890. This was written in Old English, and it was the laws of Alfred, and basically where practicing sorcery is punishable by death, and Wiccan referred to a sorcerer or an enchanter, and it was really a term that was taken back, even though it was really a term that came from the church as a very derogatory term. Interestingly, the word pagan came from the Latin paganus, which meant a country dweller, or a person who lives on the heaths, where we also see the term heathen used for anyone not practicing a monotheistic spirituality. And these tended to be people who, were more rural and lived more in nature. And I did research into looking at were there actually any hereditary traditions that were passed down through families. And the one Gerald Gardner supposedly was in was never identified. There's some stories about an Italian hereditary practice, Stragaria, but when you research it, it really is a term that's used more in America than in Italy, and there's no identifiable reference source to really trace anything back. The most obvious completely making up of a story and selling to sell books and creating a tradition that does not exist at all. There were two people. One started with Ray Buckland, who wrote Scottish Witchcraft, The History and Magic of the Picts. Now, I've done my DNA research and I'm part Pictish, so this, I went out, I didn't even see what the book was about, and I ordered a used copy for like $5. And apparently Ray Buckland was taught by this Aidan Brack, who carried this lineage, and it turns out this was most likely a fictitious creation of the author, and this wasn't actually a person who existed, and he called it Pecti Witta. And this was picked up then by another author, Adaine McCoy, and she wrote a book in Witta, an Irish pagan tradition, and applied it to Ireland. But this was entirely fabrication and to the point of ridiculousness. And so in her book, she writes that the Irish great goddess held the potato as sacred. Quote, because they grew underground, potatoes were sacred to the goddess and used in female fertility rites, she claims. Well, now, yams contain phytoestrogens and have been used in fertility rites in Hawaii, but potato doesn't create any estrogen. And potatoes originated from Peru, and they didn't actually come to Ireland until about 1100 years after the Christian conversion of Ireland, so there is no ancient potato goddess. I'm sorry to say. So there's been a lot of blatant lying and creation of stories to sell books, which is very sad.
And it really reminds you where we are in our heart and this loss we're feeling, and this need to have something that's real, and this longing in our spirit. And so I know that Cynthia might have more to share, but because of our time, I don't know if anybody can stay longer or not. If you can maybe stay 15 minutes longer? Yeah. Okay. Because we actually took the sharing a little longer, so we're running a little behind. But strangely enough, many people that also teach out of Europe seem to perpetuate the myth of having this long lineage that they're sharing from and being the caretakers of, and it's really difficult. And probably mostly this is untrue what they're saying, and it's really coming from this wanting to have this tradition, and I think there's more to it. So I even heard a teacher of mythology in the UK say that since they were Irish by hereditary, that they were the true lineage teacher. And this person even said that if you had Irish ancestors, you were American, you have no lineage. I mean, they're teaching this and they're saying this to people, and it's kind of breaking their hearts. Because you weren't born in Ireland, you really have no Irish lineage, and therefore you should look to her or him as the expert because you're not really Irish. And this is really perpetuating throughout Europe right now because everybody wants to sell workshops and be a big deal, and nobody's really telling the truth. And I think that when you don't tell the truth, you kind of end up, working from pretense, really. And it's just much more powerful to tell the truth. And It's funny, but I was talking to my roommate who's a tabla player, and he's not from India. And he said he had imposter syndrome for a long time because he was questioning if he could be a good tabla player because he wasn't from India. And he even had this Indian musicians trying to insinuate that he wasn't Indian, so he shouldn't run the gigs that he was running, even though he was given those gigs by Indian people, to hire musicians and be in charge of the music. And he studied and apprenticed for years with a famous Indian tabla player. So this is obviously kind of a theme here. And the question is appropriation. Is it appropriation? Is it sincerity? Is it real apprenticeship? And it's too bad Ava's not here because she would speak to some of this. But our elder from Ancestors of the Four Directions, Les, who works with Chief Reuben George, and some of you know him, but he's in the Ancestors of the Four Directions, and he's a very well-known environmental activist and has basically stopped the pipelines in Canada and everything. We have some pretty amazing elders in our group. He's going to speak on Indigenous apprenticeship in one of our upcoming summits that's coming up. So I just want to say, where does this all leave us? And the whole point of this here is that we really usually reach to other cultures to make up for the fact that we don't really have a lot going on. And that's a substantial thing. But thank God for those cultures that have provided some sustenance for us. And some of those cultures, because of the colonization, have been shut off, and now they're trying to reestablish themselves, and they've kind of lost some of the threads also. So what do we actually have that spurred all of this? Besides having a bit of a hole that we're trying to fill, we really do know one thing. We have a heart that is yearning to have a connection. And sometimes we're lucky to be taken in as an outsider into another tradition, which requires really a lot of humility and staying power and the willingness to watch, listen, and to be present for years. And I'm not talking about weekend warriors where you take a workshop and then you suddenly think you have it made. This is deep stuff, and it's giving your life. I and Ava, and probably Cynthia, because she's done a lot of Indigenous studies, have experienced this level of Indigenous apprenticeship. And I'm talking about 5 days a week, running in hot sand, running on hot pavement, dancing with bare feet on hot pavement. I'm talking about hardcore stuff. And we may never feel 100% congruent with these traditions, as we are rarely seen as representative of them, even if we are recognized as family in the Indigenous group, because then we go out to the world and then our group, we're not recognized as part of the group when we go out to the world. And so to be a member of these Indigenous traditions, at best, we are a familial member, but a bit of a guest. The other thing is that if we're not honest with ourselves, we may somehow avoid the fact that we are searching after and following in some of these modern traditions that are somewhat made up and not directly connected to the ancient ways, especially where Europe is concerned. And I think we're going to be exploring some of that together and bringing things in to present to each other later. Another time, we shall go into whether or not we really want to connect with those ancient ways anyway, or really pray to those gods and who those gods are. But for the time being, I would suggest that we search for the kernel of what is real in our heart. Basically, we long to have a connection with nature and the divine intimately. And we long to be part of a community, be seen, be acknowledged, be held up, one for all for one, not fall to the bottom of the heap in this crazy colonialism, and to have relevance, be included, find something real, find out what is truly real. that yearning is something precious within our being. Honestly, perhaps the yearning is even a call to a deeper relationship within ourselves and to unity with the universe. Because we know that somehow the way for us all to survive requires a new imperative and a return to wholeness and a healing. And that we need to change for the sake of life on this planet. And we need to tell the truth about it and see each other and hold each other and ourselves through it with love and compassion. I know that none of this has been easy, and some of what we've shared, not easy to hear even. It's not pleasant to even say it, really. It's hard enough to be included in a group nowadays, let alone feel like you're an outsider. And it's hard to live this legacy left by our ancestors and take responsibility for it. But, you know, the one thing we have is we have the opportunity to start cleaning it up. And that's kind of an honor in a sense. This group is dedicated to taking on this quest to find out what is true and real in ourselves and bringing it to our attention, to finding the truth in our being, to having each other's back and supporting each other and making a space in the circle for life, for ourselves and others, to making a space within the four directions and to heal that which separates us from the whole and real connections to life. So I'd like to kind of take us out with a prayer. Let us go inward and close our eyes. Now we're gonna ask the fire and earth, dear earth, fire, water, and air. You know what? We're part of you, and we appreciate you. We appreciate you in all your aspects, for breathing, the water within our body, the air in our lungs, the fire in our bellies. As we join you together in union, we ask creation to witness us and hear the prayers from each of our hearts. Absolute and unity of all existence. We ask that you take us into your loving embrace and that you open us to our true nature and into a loving relationship with the whole of creation. May a deep and true and real peace wash over us. Imagine holding hands with sisters of like heart and care about you, who care about you, support you and understand you in your journey. And you're given a warm embrace from them. Call any ancestors or people that you may love into our circle here. And see them supporting you. They join us to receive healing too. For as we heal, they heal. The universe has brought us to this place in life, and we are all included. See a place for yourself in the sacred circle of life. Let this group and your life be a place for exploration, revelation, and connection. May your most heartful and heartfelt dreams come into fruition, and those which are even beyond your scope of knowing. I now ask you to pray your silent prayers into the fire. Great Absolute, may you hear these prayers and may they be received and answered in a most beautiful way. Clearing a way for healing on all levels. I now pass to Cynthia to thank the directions.
On behalf of us all, I express deep gratitude to the directions for their presence here in our ceremony and for these deep topics, and thanking them for their gifts of inspiration that they have brought us in our circle today. I return to center.
Thanking and blessing all that joined us from the sacred circle from the four directions. We cleanse and purify ourselves in a good way as we close this circle, washing ourselves fully and completely with these medicines, bathing every corner of our energetic fields into the beyond of our daily lives. As we reflect in the coming days on all the messages and prayers shared today, may our thoughts, words, and deeds reflect the good work of realigning our own relationships with Mother Earth and all forms of life upon her. The sacred circle is now closed. May we go out into the world wrapped in a blanket of love, light, and protection as we breathe new life into creation. All my relations. Us. We invite you to return to this circle to continue our exploration and to participate with the ancestors of the four directions in our offerings. Also, in the spirit of reciprocity, if you would like to give a heart offering, the link will be placed into the chat. We have some upcoming things that are going to happen, and we're hoping to open this meeting on a monthly basis to start exploring deeply all the aspects that come up for us, and explorations into the European, both the European diaspora, but also European traditions, and what feels real and true to us, and kind of looking at all the aspects of those. We have quite a few people that we know that represent different parts of the European direction, so we may be bringing them in and asking them to speak on different things. And also, there's so many things that we can do to support each other. Singing songs, sharing different things about what we've learned, and talking about the efficacy of some of those practices, feeling and finding things that are real, and even self-realization, and going into the true spirit and the nature of things. And I would also love to hear from anyone if they would like us to explore certain things in the circle. We would love to hear your suggestions and take them up and really explore those things. So this we would love to have you be interested, if possible, in continuing with us. And we also hope that any of you that have not met or been involved in the Four Directions ceremonies and the Four Directions, the Ancestor, the Four Directions work, that you're invited to come in where we have Native elders. We're hoping to have Native elders speaking, and there'll be a Japanese elder perhaps next time. And we're going to be speaking on different things on healing the sacred hoop and how we're going to go about that. We have some incredible African elders also that speak on the situation. And the one thing about all of us is you can feel within that group that there's a dedication and love to work with each other, and an honoring that is superseding the boundaries that are currently in this world. And there comes a great hope in my heart from that. So we really appreciate having everyone here, and thank you. And if anybody has any questions or anything they'd like to say, the floor is open. So.